Elite waiter refuses to serve a simple elderly woman. Then her husband buys the entire restaurant. In the upscale neighborhood of Beacon Hill, Boston, Chez Laurent stood as a monument to fine dining. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, and a 3-month waiting list made it the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The establishment had received its second Michelin star last year, and executive chef Laurent Beaumont had become something of a celebrity in culinary circles. James Harrington, head waiter at Chez Laurent for 8 years, took immense pride in his position. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and impeccable posture gave him an air of authority. He knew wine pairings like the back of his hand and could recite the evening specials with theatrical precision. The restaurant's elite clientele respected him, and in return, he ensured their dining experience was nothing short of perfection. On a chilly Friday evening in October, James surveyed the dining room with a critical eye. Everything was in order. The ambient lighting cast a warm glow. The soft, classical music provided the perfect backdrop for conversation, and the gentle clink of fine china created a symphony of elegance. "James, there's been a change to table 7, said Melissa, the maître d', approaching with a tablet in hand. "The Caldwell reservation has been moved to next week. We've seated an elderly couple instead." James frowned. "That wasn't cleared with me. Who are they?" "Margaret and Robert Johnson. They don't have a reservation, but Mr. Beaumont approved it personally." James's eyes narrowed as he spotted the couple at table 7, one of the best in the house, with a view of both the Boston Common and the open kitchen. The woman wore a simple blue dress that was at least a decade out of style, and her gray hair was pulled back in a plain bun. Her husband, a tall man with weathered hands, wore a suit that appeared well-made, but certainly not designer. "They're not our usual clientele," James said, his tone clipped. "Who's serving them?" "You are," Melissa replied, already walking away. "They specifically requested our best waiter." James straightened his tie, his jaw tight. This was precisely the type of situation he'd spent his career avoiding. Inexperienced diners required too much explanation, asked too many questions, and rarely appreciated the fine nuances of haute cuisine. Worse, they seldom tipped appropriately for the level of service Chez Laurent provided. Nevertheless, professionalism demanded he approach their table. As he drew near, he noticed the woman's weathered hands as she studied the menu with obvious confusion. "Good evening," he said, his voice controlled and distant. "I'm James, and I'll be your server tonight." The woman looked up at him with kind eyes. "Hello, James. I'm Margaret, and this is my husband, Robert. This is our first time here, and we're a bit overwhelmed by the menu. Could you recommend something?" James gave a tight smile. "Perhaps if this is your first experience with fine dining, you might be more comfortable at the bistro down the street. They offer simpler fare." Robert Johnson looked up sharply, his expression changing from warm to guarded. "Are you suggesting we leave?" "Not at all, sir," James replied smoothly. "I'm merely concerned that our menu might not suit your palate. Chef Beaumont's cuisine is quite sophisticated." Margaret's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she maintained her dignity. "We'd still like to try. Perhaps you could explain some of these dishes to us." James checked his watch. "I have other tables requiring my attention. I'll send over one of our junior servers who can take more time with you." As he walked away, James didn't notice the quiet exchange between the couple, nor did he see Robert Johnson's hand reach across the table to comfort his wife. And he certainly didn't see the steel in Robert's eyes as he watched James's retreating form. Margaret Johnson sat quietly in her seat, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the linen napkin. 50 years of marriage had taught her to read her husband's expressions, and right now, Robert was furious, though he'd never show it publicly. "Maggie," Robert said gently, using his nickname for her, "we don't have to stay." "No," she replied, finding her courage. "I've been wanting to try this restaurant since I read about it last year. One rude waiter isn't going to ruin our anniversary dinner." A younger server approached their table, her smile genuine. "Hello, I'm Sophia. I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Thank you, Sophia," Robert said. "We'd like a bottle of champagne, please. We're celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary." "Congratulations!" Sophia exclaimed. "That's wonderful. I'll bring you our finest champagne." As Sophia left, Margaret looked around the restaurant. The decor was beautiful, understated elegance with modern touches. Through the large windows, she could see the lights of Boston twinkling in the evening darkness. "Remember our first date?" Margaret asked, her eyes growing distant with memory. "That little diner on Commonwealth Avenue?" Robert smiled, reaching for her hand. "How could I forget? You ordered a chocolate milkshake and told me about your dreams of becoming a teacher. And you were just starting at that little accounting firm," Margaret added, "working 60 hours a week for practically nothing." "Best decision I ever made," Robert said. "It led to everything else." What James didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that 50 years ago, Robert Johnson had started as a junior accountant at a small firm. Through decades of hard work, careful investment, and an eye for undervalued property, he had built Johnson Financial Group, one of the largest private equity firms in New England. Robert and Margaret had chosen to live modestly despite their wealth. They still lived in the same house they'd bought when Robert was 30, though it had been renovated several times, and Margaret still clipped coupons out of habit. Their 3 children had been raised to value work ethic over wealth, and all had gone on to successful careers of their own. But tonight was special. 50 years of marriage deserved a celebration, and Margaret had mentioned reading about Chez Laurent. She'd never been one for fancy restaurants, preferring homemade meals shared around their family table. But Robert had insisted on making a reservation for their anniversary. Sophia returned with the champagne and took their order, patiently explaining each dish and making thoughtful recommendations. From across the room, James watched with a frown, clearly displeased that the couple appeared to be enjoying themselves despite his dismissal. "Don't let him bother you," Robert said, noticing Margaret's gaze drift toward James. "Some people forgot the value of kindness along the way. I wonder what made him that way?" Margaret mused. As a retired elementary school teacher, she had always tried to understand behavior rather than condemn it. Maybe he's having a bad day, or maybe he's forgotten that how you treat people matters more than what they can do for you, Robert replied, taking a sip of his champagne. "Either way, I have a call to make. Excuse me for a moment, dear." Margaret watched as Robert stepped outside, phone in hand. After 50 years, she knew that determined look. Her husband was planning something. 3 days later, James arrived at Chez Laurent for his Monday evening shift to find an unusual buzz among the staff. Melissa was speaking in hushed tones with Chef Beaumont near the bar, and several servers were gathered in small groups, talking excitedly. "What's going on?" James asked Nicole, another senior server. "Haven't you heard? The restaurant's been sold. Some investment company bought it over the weekend. Chef Beaumont just told us." James felt his stomach drop. "Sold? But that's impossible. The owner never mentioned putting it up for sale. Apparently it was a cash offer they couldn't refuse," Nicole replied. "Nobody knows much, but they say the new owner is coming in today to meet everyone." James straightened his tie nervously. Change was rarely good in the restaurant business. New owners typically meant new management, new menus, and often new staff. After 8 years of building his reputation at Chez Laurent, James wasn't about to let some corporate takeover threaten his position. Chef Beaumont called the staff together before the dinner service. "As you've all heard, the restaurant has indeed been sold. I've been assured that no major changes will be made to our concept or menu in the immediate future. I'll be staying on as executive chef, and the new owner has requested that all staff remain in place for now." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. "The new owner will be dining here tonight," Chef continued. "Table 7 has been reserved. James, you'll be serving him." James nodded, a sense of validation washing over him. If he was chosen to serve the new owner, clearly his position was secure. Table 7 was the best in the house, the same table where that elderly couple had sat on Friday night. The dinner service began, and James kept a watchful eye on the door, anticipating the arrival of the new owner. He imagined a young tech millionaire, or perhaps a restaurant group executive, someone who would appreciate his knowledge and expertise. At precisely 7 o'clock, Melissa approached him. "James, the new owner has arrived. He's at table 7 with his wife." James turned, his confident smile freezing in place as he saw Robert and Margaret Johnson being seated at table 7. He blinked in disbelief. This had to be some kind of joke. "I don't understand," he said quietly to Melissa. "Those are the same people from Friday night. The ones I—" He trailed off, suddenly aware of how his actions might be perceived. "Yes, the ones you pawned off on Sophia," Melissa finished for him, an edge to her voice. "That's Robert Johnson of Johnson Financial Group. Apparently, he's had his eye on this place for some time, and your behavior on Friday night helped him make his decision." James felt the blood drain from his face. Johnson Financial Group, the investment firm? The very same, worth billions, from what I hear. And now, our boss. Melissa handed him 2 menus, and they're waiting for their server. On wooden legs, James approached table 7. Margaret Johnson spotted him first, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Good evening," James said, his voice straining for its usual confidence. "Welcome back to Chez Laurent." "Hello again, James," Robert said pleasantly. "I understand you'll be taking care of us this evening?" James nodded, unable to trust his voice. "Wonderful," Robert continued. "For, as you may have heard, my wife and I are now the owners of this establishment. We were so impressed with our experience on Friday that we decided to make an investment." "Congratulations, sir," James managed to say. "May I start you with something to drink? Actually, before that, I'd like to have a word with you after we order," Robert said. "Nothing to worry about. Just a small matter of service standard." James felt his career flashing before his eyes as he took their order and retreated to the kitchen. He had spent years building his reputation, and in a single interaction, he had jeopardized everything. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him as he prepared their drinks with trembling hands. After delivering the Johnsons' appetizers, James was summoned to join Robert in the small private dining room adjacent to the main floor. The room was empty except for 2 chairs facing each other. Robert gestured for James to sit. "Do you know why I bought this restaurant, James?" Robert asked, his voice calm but firm. "I assume because it's a sound investment, sir," James replied, trying to maintain his composure. "Chez Laurent has an excellent reputation. That's part of it," Robert acknowledged. "But the real reason has more to do with what happened on Friday night." James swallowed hard. Sir, about that night, I want to apologize." Robert held up a hand. "I grew up poor in South Boston," he said, cutting James off. "My father worked at the shipyards, and my mother cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but they taught me something valuable. How you treat people matters." He leaned forward slightly. "My wife taught elementary school for 40 years. She shaped the lives of hundreds of children, teaching them not just reading and math, but kindness and respect. On Friday, you made her feel small and unwelcome because you judged her by her appearance." James looked down at his hands. "I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did," Robert agreed. "But mistakes are opportunities for growth. That's something else Margaret taught her students." Outside the private dining room, the restaurant continued its evening service. Through the glass panel in the door, James could see Margaret chatting warmly with Sophia, who was now serving their table. "I have a proposition for you," Robert continued. "I'm establishing a new training program for our staff, not just for food knowledge or wine pairings, but for something more fundamental: how to treat every guest with dignity and respect, regardless of how they're dressed or whether they understand the menu." James looked up, confused. Sir, I'd like you to take 2 weeks off, paid, of course, and when you return, you'll work with our new hospitality director to implement this program. You'll start by spending time at some of our city's more modest establishments, observing how they create welcoming environments for all their guests." "You're not firing me?" James asked, genuinely surprised. Firing you would be easy, James. Teaching you would be valuable, not just for you, but for everyone you'll influence in the future. Robert stood. Margaret and I believe that people can change when given the chance to see things differently. We're giving you that chance. James stood as well, humbled by the unexpected turn of events. Thank you, sir. I don't deserve this opportunity. Perhaps not, Robert replied honestly. But deserving has little to do with growth, James. Now, I believe we have a dinner to finish, and this time, I'd like you to be our server. As they walked back into the main dining room, James caught Margaret's eye. She gave him a small, encouraging smile that reminded him of his own grandmother, a woman who had worked as a housekeeper her entire life, but had more dignity and grace than many of the wealthy patrons he'd served over the years. For the first time in his career, James felt a crack in the facade he'd built around himself. The realization of how he'd been treating people, not just the Johnsons, but anyone he'd deemed beneath his standard, hit him with full force. 6 months later, Chez Laurent was busier than ever. The restaurant had maintained its 2 Michelin stars under Chef Beaumont's continued leadership, but something fundamental had shifted in its atmosphere. The exclusivity remained, but the pretension had diminished. Under the Johnsons' ownership, a new policy had been instituted. Every month, one night was dedicated to first-time fine dining guests. People who had never experienced a restaurant of Chez Laurent's caliber could apply for a special reservation. And those selected received not just a meal, but an education in fine dining, presented with respect and warmth, rather than condescension. James, now the hospitality director, as well as the head waiter, had emerged as the unexpected champion of this initiative. The 2 weeks he'd spent observing neighborhood restaurants had opened his eyes to a different kind of service excellence, one based on making guests feel welcomed rather than intimidated. On this particular evening, James was overseeing the dinner service when Melissa approached him. "Table 7 is here," she said with a smile. "It's their first anniversary." James looked over to see an elderly couple being seated. Not the Johnson, but another pair, clearly nervous and a bit overwhelmed by the elegant surroundings. The woman clutched her handbag tightly, and the man kept adjusting his tie. "I'll take them," James said, already moving toward the table. He approached with a warm smile. "Good evening, and welcome to Chez Laurent. My name is James, and it's my absolute pleasure to serve you tonight. Is this your first time dining with us?" The woman nodded shyly. "Yes. Our children gave us this dinner as an anniversary gift. It's our 40th. Congratulations," James said, genuinely pleased. "What a wonderful milestone. If you'll permit me, I'd be honored to guide you through our menu and help make this a memorable celebration." From across the room, Margaret and Robert Johnson watched the interaction. They had become regular patrons, dining at the restaurant they now owned at least once a week. Robert squeezed his wife's hand. "Look at that," he said quietly. "Worth every penny we paid for this place." Margaret smiled. "Wasn't about the money, was it?" "It never is," Robert replied, watching as James patiently explained the evening's specials to the couple, his manner attentive and kind. "Toiki, it's about remembering where you came from and treating others the way you wish to be treated." Later that evening, after most of the guests had departed, James approached the Johnsons' table with a special dessert, a recreation of the chocolate milkshake Margaret had ordered on their first date 50 years earlier, reimagined by Chef Beaumont as an elegant, deconstructed dessert. "Mrs. Johnson," James said, placing the dessert before her. "Mr. Johnson mentioned that this was significant to you both. Chef Beaumont and I wanted to create something special to thank you." Margaret's eyes misted over as she looked at the artistic presentation. "It's beautiful, James, and please, call me Margaret." "Thank you, Margaret," James replied, the formality that had once been his shield now replaced by genuine respect. As he walked away to give them privacy, James reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. The restaurant was still exclusive. Reservations were booked months in advance, but now the experience was defined by warmth as much as by culinary excellence. The lesson Robert Johnson had taught him, extended far beyond proper service. It was about seeing the humanity in everyone who walked through the door, regardless of appearance or background. It was about understanding that true hospitality began with kindness, not judgment. Outside, the Boston skyline twinkled against the night sky. Inside Chez Laurent, under the soft lighting, people from all walks of life shared meals, conversations, and connections. The invisible barriers that had once defined the space slowly dissolving with each genuine smile and moment of authentic care. James had learned that the most valuable currency in hospitality wasn't exclusivity or prestige. It was making people feel valued, exactly as they were. And that, he realized, was a lesson worth far more than the price of the restaurant itself.